Okay, awesome. So welcome, Natasha. Natasha inspires people to start and stay moving in the direction of their goals and dreams in life. An entrepreneur, speaker, and registered physical therapist specializing in concussion therapy. Natasha knows from experience that there are two things in order to live our best life: hope that the change we seek is actually possible, and the support of somebody who cares about our success. And she knows from experience. In her physical therapy practice, Natasha and her team help hundreds of people each year recover from debilitating concussion symptoms and reclaim their lives by getting back to work, back to playing with their kids, and simply living life again. She's the founder of Symphony Rehabilitation, a multidisciplinary clinic that provides concussion rehab for individuals struggling from acute and prolonged concussion symptoms. Natasha credits the support of an amazing community of women for giving her the courage to take the first steps towards her dreams and starting her own business. Wanting to give the same supportive environment to others in their concussion journey, she co-founded Concussion Compass, an online community that provides individuals with post-concussion symptoms the support, knowledge, and tools critical to their recovery journey. Natasha loves sharing her knowledge about achieving goals, finding and building communities, and the importance of awareness and education about concussions. So welcome, Natasha. I'm just going to spotlight you for everybody, and you can get going.
Thank you for having me. Oh, okay. I'm just wondering if I put myself on gallery, I think I should still be on spotlight for you. I like to see everyone's faces. Thanks for having me. Whenever I have to send a bio or something like that, and then it gets read out loud, I was like, oh, I get nervous because I'm like, oh, I guess that sounds like me. Thank you so much for having me. So, you guys, this is meant. So, Claire asked me to come chat with you guys about a little about concussion and a little bit about Concussion Compass and what we do. I love an interactive environment. So, literally, we can turn this into a little bit. I'll talk about Compass, obviously. And I'll talk about concussions, but we can make this an interactive Q&A throughout this entire time. I think we have an hour, Claire, is that right? Yeah, so I am happy to answer your questions and I would prefer interaction. So there is no silly question. Any question is a good question. I can't promise you I can answer it, but I will try my best to do so and kind of give you guys some information. So just so I have an idea, and at any point too, if you do, I love talking to faces, but I appreciate if you need to either turn yourself away from your screen or turn your camera off for a period of time as well. That's totally fine. For those of you that have cameras on, can I just get a quick show of hands? Because I know it's a brain injury support group, an acquired brain injury. How many people are recovering from concussion specifically and PCS? Okay. And then are there people, thank you. And then are there people here with more, when I say severe acquired traumatic brain injury as well? Okay. So we're mostly a concussion group at this point. Perfect. Okay. Another super quick show of hands. Who here has heard of Concussion Compass? Anyone in this group? No. Oh, yay. I get to share all the goodness with you then. So as Claire said, my name is Natasha. So I'm in Western Canada. So I live in Nanaimo, in British Columbia on Vancouver Island. And I am obviously a business owner. I'm a mom. I have 3 kids. We BMX race in the summer. And then my husband obviously is here as well. And when I'm not treating in the clinic, I am working on my businesses and speaking and trying to increase that awareness and that education around both acute concussion and persistent concussion, because there is still just a big black hole and a deficit of information in our healthcare system on how we can support people through this process. I'm on Instagram, and so I shared a little bit about my story and why I'm so passionate about this. So I don't have PCS. I've never had PCS. I've never had a concussion, except like a minor one when I was 18. But when I was 17 years old, someone very near and dear to me did experience a severe concussion. But back then, they didn't rehab them. So he looked like his normal self. The treatment was Tylenol, and we were told to go on your way. The person they had impulse issues, they had memory issues, And it kind of wreaked havoc on our family a little bit. And we didn't know any better. I was also a 17-year-old teenager, so that probably didn't help the situation whatsoever. But when I became a physical therapist and I opened my clinic in Nanaimo, so this was in 2016, I was the brain physio. And so there was an OT in town who basically said, I have this person who had a concussion and I don't know what's happening, but they're still having issues. And it was like, Natasha's the brain physio, so let's refer her to her. So she was referred to my clinic, and I hadn't treated concussion at that point in time. So I like dug out my textbooks and started to read, and I very quickly dove headfirst into learning how to do a better job in treating concussion, because her rehab was in my hands, and I felt like I didn't know enough to support her, and that wasn't okay in my books. So I dove down the rabbit hole. That was about 6 years ago now, and I haven't looked back. But as I was diving down that rabbit hole, everything that I experienced as a 17-year-old with my family member started to make sense. I understood the struggles he was having. I understood the symptoms he was experiencing that no one could explain to us. Had a better understanding of what should have been done, that at the time we didn't know better. And the really unfortunate thing is I still see that today, and I shouldn't see that. We have enough research, we have enough education, we have enough awareness that we should know how to properly support people that are going through this journey. And unfortunately, there's still this huge gap. And so for me, I am incredibly passionate about decreasing that knowledge gap for people to have access to resources, for the medical system to do a better job. And that's why I do chats like this as well. So that's a little bit about kind of my why and why. Hi, Andrea. Sorry, I just saw someone I knew. And why I do what I do. And so what had happened was, the more and more I saw people come into my clinic, I was never the first person that they saw, ever. More commonly I am, but at the time I was person 3, 4, 5, 10, 20. A lot of people would end up in our clinic by fluke. And it got to the point where over and over again, I would see people who'd been told, this is just the way you have to live. There's nothing you can do. It just takes time. I've had neurologists tell clients that any physical therapist who tells you they can help you is a cash grab, which that one infuriated me, but we won't go down that path. So there's all these different things. And I kept seeing people fall through the cracks and not have the information they needed. And that wasn't okay. And so many years ago, I started to brainstorm, how could I support people on a bigger scale besides one-on-one in my clinic? Because as much as I love one-on-one, there's only one of me, and there's only so many hours in a day. And that's when Molly Parker and I met via Instagram. And Molly, if you don't know, Molly has had her own concussion and has been on her own post-concussion journey. And she's also a physical therapist. And so because she went through a tumultuous kind of journey herself, she also has this mission so that other people don't experience the path that she experienced in her recovery. So you had me, who's dedicated my life to it, or my career to it, who has a family member who was affected by it. And you have Molly, who's also a physical therapist, who has lived this herself. And together we had this same mission to be a force for change. And so together we founded Concussion Compass, which is what Claire wanted me to speak about today. So Andrea can talk about Concussion Compass. Andrea is a Compass member. So Concussion Compass is an online membership community for people living with persistent concussion symptoms. So if you've had symptoms anywhere from 3 months or longer, and that can be years longer, this would be a place that you could come for support. So we use a framework. We call it our Compass framework, because we know that, and Lucy, I do see your question. I will answer it. We know that when you enter this persistent stage, it's a multifactorial reason usually as to why things haven't recovered, right? So it could be that there is multiple kind of physiological things that need to be addressed. It could be that there's hormonal issues that could be addressed. It could be that there's metabolic issues, but we know when you reach this persistent stage, it's usually multifactorial. And there's things that, yes, you will need the support of a medical provider and a healthcare provider to help you overcome and rehab through. But there are definitely things that on your own you can do to see an improvement in your symptoms so that you can engage in your life a little bit more. So, quick question. How many of you, with a show of hands, we call it the boom or bust cycle? So, you feel okay, so you do everything you can while you feel good. And then you, yeah, I see. Okay, I know your name's not Mark. uh, but I see, and then you just like, you do everything you can while you're good, and then you crash for days. Yeah, Karen. Oh, look at all the, hello, friends. Hello. Super common. We teach something called planning and pacing. How many of you have heard of planning and pacing? Hands up. Oh, there we go. I love it. So we teach it in a couple different ways in Compass, but not only do we teach it, it's the reasoning behind. So there's things that you can do in your own day-to-day life to improve your symptoms. And so what we do in Compass is we literally have these 4 pillars that we work through. We work through lifestyle habits because that's a big piece. So we talk, that's planning and pacing, that's your sleep, that's your nutrition, that's your aerobic exercise. And we guide you through a process of figuring out, where are you actually at in those things? Where do we need to get you to, and how do we get you there? We look at mindset, because mindset, as much as some people hate that word, is so important. So important. And we have a whole section on that. We look at, and then we obviously look at symptom specific stuff. So let's talk about dizziness for a second. How many of you deal with dizziness? I see some, oh, the car is gone. Now we're walking. I see, so dizziness, super common. Dizziness comes from many different sources, right? So dizziness can come from your neck. Dizziness can come from your eyes. Dizziness can come from orthostatic postural issues or dysautonomia. Dizziness can come from your vestibular system. Dizziness can come from anxiety. So you could be someone that has dizziness, and it could be from one of those elements, or it could be a combination of all 5, or it could be 3. But in Compass, we work you through a process to get to the root reason of why you have dizziness. And then we begin to give you some beginning exercises to start to work with it as well. Because if you just consistently chase your symptoms and try to treat your symptoms, and you're not getting to the reason behind why your symptoms are happening, then you're managing, you're not rehabbing, right? Is that different? That makes sense to everyone, yes? So what we do in Compass is we try to help you get to the root reason of your symptoms. And if we can support you in the rehab piece, we will, but we will also connect you with providers in your areas as best we can to connect you as well. And then we have a really awesome community. So we have a Facebook group that's private to people and members. But then we do live calls every month. So you get live calls with Molly and I on mentorship topics and office hours. We have ambassadors who are people who've been on this journey just like you guys, and they support too. So we have an ambassador call a month, and then we bring guest experts in. And so guest experts that are amazing at what they do, that to actually get in to see them would probably take you months on a wait list. So they come and chat with us and educate and have Q&A. And then we just have we call it office hours. Basically, I show up in a Zoom room just like this. And I say, ask me your questions for 60 minutes. And then we answer a lot of questions. So we created the program so that you didn't have to try to figure this out alone anymore. So you didn't have to try to guess which treatments might help you and like go pay hundreds of dollars and then keep your fingers crossed. We created it so you could have one place that had all the information that you needed, that had the science behind it to help explain what's happening, but then give you tools to actually do something about it. And to give you a super supportive community as well. So that was our dream behind creating Compass and to being able to do that. And so up to date, we've had over 600 members so far that have kind of come through and worked through the program. Our goal is that you eventually leave us. We love having people in the program, but the goal is that you get better and you graduate and you move on to more amazing things. A couple of our members that have just left us recently have shared some of their stories, and you'll see them come up on our social media a bit more. But one of them came through the program, and she actually runs a group like this. So her name's Emily, and she actually runs a support group, and she didn't join Compass for months, like months, because she was that person, and she says it too. She's like, I did my research. Like I knew what I need. I thought I knew what I needed. I had a good healthcare team. And she joined Compass, and it was that piece of it put everything together. And after she graduated Compass, she's back to work full time. She's decreased her appointments from 3 to 5 a week to 2 to 3 a month. She has done phenomenal. Alexa is now running full miles again. She's back to work full time, but everybody's different. We have members who've been with us a bit longer who were definitely dealing with more significant symptoms. And she's like, my hands up. But you get that, you understand what you're dealing with more, and you get that guidance, and you get that support, and you get that structure. So you still move forward. It's just everyone is very unique and individualized in how they use the program and what they get out of the program. Anywho, that's Compass. That's my other baby besides my 3 kids. I see 2 questions. So Lucy says, what is the definition of the difference between concussion and brain injury? Okay. Every concussion is technically a mild traumatic brain injury, or an MTBI, but not every brain injury is a concussion. Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. So concussion is a blow to the biomechanical force to the body, so not necessarily to the head, right? We know we don't need to hit our heads to have a concussion. So it's a biomechanical force to the body that causes an acceleration, deceleration motion. And what that does is that causes shearing of the axons within your brain. Okay, so it causes a functional disturbance between the connectivity of the different regions of your brain. It has a metabolic and a physiological kind of cascade that it goes through with inflammation and all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The reason I say that's important is because that doesn't show up on any form of imaging whatsoever. None. That we have publicly. If you are part of a research hospital, different story. Or research, that's different. But in terms of what we can image for MRIs, CAT scans, those things, concussions don't show up. But it's still a mild traumatic brain injury. Okay. More, when I say moderate to severe traumatic brain injuries, that's when there's been something that's happened, and you're going to see that pathological difference. So if you start having bleeds, strokes, major traumatic injuries where there's actual physiological structural damage to the brain, those all fall into the brain injury window. Okay, but that would be the difference between those things are going to show up more on imaging, and in most cases obviously have more severe consequences than a concussion. So every concussion is an MTBI, but not every brain injury is a concussion. That's that kind of lovely sentence I like to say. Depending on who you speak to, they used to grade concussions, right? So there used to be, you had a mild, moderate, or severe concussion. We don't use that terminology anymore either, because that doesn't necessarily predict what your outcome is going to be. So yes, generally they say, if you have more severe MTBIs, so mild traumatic brain injuries, then potentially the recovery could be longer, but they're not finding that, right? So how many of you have had more than one concussion? Okay. How many of you felt like, how many of you had a delayed kind of recovery from your previous ones at all? Yeah, so everyone's different, right? Like I'll have people who it'll be concussion number 2, and they're like, well, my first one was like terrible, and this one was a bump on the head, and now all of a sudden I have PCS. Right? So it's why we don't necessarily grade them. We don't talk about them, and that we know that if you lose consciousness, it's technically a more severe concussion, but you don't hear it talked about a lot as mild to moderate to severe concussion anymore. You just hear concussion. So Sarah has said, I was told by my OT that planning and pacing doesn't work for someone who is dealing with a long-term concussion. Is this true? I'm going to say that's false. And I'm going to apologize if I don't want to disrespect. Which one of you is Sarah? Hi, Sarah. I don't want to disrespect your OT in any way, shape, or form, but that is false. planning and pacing is 100% as important in a chronic, persistent concussion as it is in an acute phase. There's just different guidelines that you use to help you plan and pace. So let's talk about that for a second. Would that be helpful if I talk about that really quickly for anyone? Okay. So in an acute concussion, when you're planning and pacing, we have to stay, the recommendation is you stay below symptom threshold, right? So you're doing things in your day and you're taking rest breaks, but you need to stay below symptoms. So that's the general guideline for acute concussion itself. Persistent concussion, I always talk about it as you need to knock on the door of challenging your nervous system, but you can't bash through it with a battering ram. That's kind of how I phrase it. So Andrea's heard me say all this stuff before. So when you're planning and pacing with a chronic concussion, we use the 2-point rule. So that 2-point rule is that if you want to run a scale of 0 to 10, and 0 is you have no symptoms that day whatsoever. You're perfect. It's probably the inverse of what you think. You're perfectly great. You're healthy. You're awesome. You feel great. A 10 would be you are non-functional. Your symptoms are so bad. You're ready to go to the hospital. Okay. So before you begin an activity or a task or whatever you're going to do, I always say to people, just do a little symptom check-in. Don't overanalyze it, but just say like, how am I feeling right now? And if you intuitively are like, I'm at a 4. Okay, you're at 4. When you go into doing that task, whatever it is, your symptoms, you can allow your symptoms to increase by 2 points, which means if you started at a 4, you can go till you're at a 6. But then you have to scale it back, pause, break. How many of you use palming to help you calm your symptoms? How many people don't know what palming is? Oh my gosh. Oh, we have to do this together. Okay. Palming is one of the easiest and best tools you could ever use to immediately start to calm symptoms. Now, it won't take them away, but if you're doing that activity, right, and you've pushed yourself to a 6 and you're like, oh my God, I just feel terrible, and you need something to help those symptoms calm down, you use palming. If you're at a family member's house and your niece and nephew are going crazy and your symptoms are starting to spike from overstimulation, you excuse yourself to the bathroom and you do palming. Okay, palming is your best friend. When you come out of the grocery store and you're sitting back in your car, you do palming. Okay, so here's what we do. I was sitting cross-legged on my chair, so I had to, you want to ground yourself. So you want to be in a comfortable position so that your body feels supported. Okay. You take your hands, and I always just say rub them together because my hands are freezing. And if you put cold hands on your face, it's just not going to be very comfortable. I'm going to give you 2 sets of directions. So number 1, if you get dizzy when you close your eyes, please keep your eyes open as we do this. If you close your eyes as we do this and you feel okay, that's fine. If you close your eyes and you feel dizzy, open your eyeballs. Okay? So you friction your hands so they're a little bit warmer, which just feels nicer on your eye face. You're going to make 2 little cups. You're going to take, I'm going to only do one hand so I can see it. So what you're going to do is you're going to take both your hands and you're going to put them over your eyes, and you're going to imagine forming a seal around your hands on your face. And then what I want you to do is we're just going to breathe. So you're going to, and if you need to, you can rest your elbows on your hands or you can rest them on a table. And we're going to go, I'll count you through in a second, but we're going to breathe in through our nose. And if you can, out through your nose as well. Okay. So we're going to do a box breath. So you're going to cover both eyes. You're forming that nice seal. So you feel a little bit of pressure on your face from your hands. Your eyes are open if they need to be, or you could close them. And you're going to breathe in through your nose for 1, 2, 3, 4, hold, exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, exhale. 3, 2, 1. Hold. A few more. Inhale for 2, 3, 4. Hold. Exhale for 3, 2, 1. Hold. And just give yourself a couple more breaths if you need them. And when you're ready, you can take your hands away and come back. Palming is one of the easiest and best strategies you can use to try to calm your symptoms. Sorry about that. Particularly if overstimulation is a reason for them. You can do that for 5 minutes. You can do it for 7 minutes. You can do it for 3 minutes. But if you haven't utilized this yet, please utilize it in your day regularly. Okay. So it's one of our faves. We teach it all the time. You guys, does anyone else have questions? We have 30 minutes left, and I want to make sure we're sharing things that you want information on. So if anyone has a question, you can type it. You can unmute yourself and ask it if that's easier for you as well. I'm happy to do that. Dun, dun, dun. Everyone's so quiet. I'm a giant dork, which you will, if you ever see me present, or obviously you're experiencing it right now. I have no problems with my dorky self either.
What happens? I have a question.
Yeah.
What happens when I do yoga and that can actually raise my symptoms?
Mm-hmm.
And so I tend to just adapt it and not, I go to a child's pose to regroup, and then I rejoin when it fits. But I have noticed sometimes yoga can actually overstimulate and the symptoms increase.
Margie, are you doing?
And that's not.
Yeah,
that's not something that you think about with yoga.
Are you doing a modified adapted yoga class, or are you doing a regular yoga class?
I'm doing one regular class online, and then another one that's a very gentle one that doesn't overstimulate. But the regular one, I do adopt it. I adopt it.
Yeah. So yoga can be, in general, yoga can be really wonderful because it's usually a slower pace, very gentle on the body, but you're still moving, and there's always breath work involved in yoga, always. But depending on the instructor, depending on the class, where it can flare symptoms for a lot of people is if there is a lot of positional changes of having to move down and up. So anytime you're doing a postural change, that's going to stimulate your vestibular system. Depending on the movement, it's also going to stimulate your neck. So if those are areas of difficulty for you, then that could potentially flare your symptoms instead of calming it down. So what you're doing with adapting it yourself, you're probably making it more of a level field and less up and down and less inversions, which is great. That's one way to absolutely calm it down. And then just going into child's pose and focusing on your breath when you're there is perfect. And you're doing what you can. So the thing is you've adapted and modified it that suits you, and that's perfect. It's finding those things that work for you. Yeah, you're all good there. Lucy said, do you elongate out the breath to be even one count longer than the in-breath? Lucy, there's so many different breathing practices out there that you can do. So technically box breathing, which I didn't guide you through properly, now that I actually think about what I just guided you through. Box breathing is 4 counts in, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, Inhale for 4. So it's like a square. Just not what I did to you at all. When you talk to someone, so I have a breath control therapist on my team. So when he teaches just functional breathing, it's an inhale, it's a hold for a second, and then it's an exhale, it's a hold for a second. You'll see people that talk about 2-to-1 ratio or 1-to-2. So you breathe in, you hold, you exhale for twice as long as you inhale. Or you'll hear it talked about is either anxiety breathing or 4-7-8 breathing. So it's inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. I can't do that myself. That one actually makes me feel more lightheaded. So I inhale for 2, hold for 3, exhale for 4. What's important with any sort of breath practice, you guys, is when you're practicing breathing, that you want to make sure you're not using your accessory muscles and your breath is coming into your shoulders, because that's going to feed into, if you do have anxiety, that's going to feed into that a little bit more. What you want to do is more of I'm just going to back up here, give me one sec. You want to do more of what we call it a 360-degree breath. So you're thinking about breathing into the rib cage, and the rib cage is expanding and then contracting. So when you're doing your breath practice, the first part that's super important, and in almost everything we do and what we talk about in Compass 2, is awareness. Because if you don't know what you're doing currently, you can't make changes, right? A lot of the times we think we're doing something, and then we implement what we call these awareness weeks in Compass, and you realize, oh crap, what I thought I was doing is not what I'm actually doing. And so there's a lot of, I find when we get into, especially in the persistent stage with a lot of the people that I work with, they're constantly searching for, what do I have to do to move forward? What's the next thing I have to do? What's the therapy I have to do? Who's the person I have to see? What's the appointment I have to make? Does that sound familiar to any of you? Right? And sometimes that first step is, I'm just going to take a week and observe. And sometimes having that awareness of the things you're doing, of what's driving symptoms, of how you're feeling, that awareness is the first step to then be able to start and making change. So when we talked about planning and pacing earlier, the first week or 2 is always awareness before we make any changes whatsoever. So with breathing and breath, you'll talk to a lot of people who they say, well, I do a breath work, I do a mindfulness work. And then we'll look at it at the clinic together, or we'll do a virtual consult and I'll look at their breath patterns. And this is how they breathe. This is not restorative. This is not going to activate your sympathetic nervous system or your parasympathetic nervous system in any way, shape, or form. This is going to feed into hyperventilation. This is going to feed into anxiety. So when you practice a breath practice, the first step is, how am I breathing? Am I breathing into my lower ribs? Am I breathing into my diaphragm? And so the first step might not be, I'm going to do a box breath, or I'm going to do, it's just, I'm just going to practice checking in with myself several times a day. So when we talk about making habits, every time I stand up, I'm just going to put my hands on my ribs, and I'm just going to take a breath and fill my air into my lower hands. You start to make change by using these little opportunities that pop up in your day, because the more we can repeat something, the more we start to learn. So in terms of breath, if you're someone who, if you actually pause and you're like, if I take a deep breath in and it all goes up here, the PS, this is going to contribute to headaches and potentially cervicogenic dizziness and all those things too. Okay. Then you're going to be someone that you're going to be like, okay, I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to put my hands on my lower rib cage, and I'm going to imagine that air breathing down into my hands, and I'm going to feel my hands move away from my body. And surprisingly, you will notice that it will be harder in different postures. So you might really struggle to do it in standing, but you could do it in sitting. Or you might really struggle in sitting, but you could do it if you're lying on your side. So play around with those different things to find what truly works for you. And if you notice, this is when we talk about progression of things, right? If you're like, I can't do it in sitting. Like I find when I sit, I do this, but you could do it in laying down, then your progression, you guys, would be you start in laying, then you move to reclined, then you move to sit. Baby steps, right? In everything you do. Andrew just said, COVID gave me, I didn't know you had COVID. Did you have COVID? Oh, I got it. Okay. Oh, hold on a sec. COVID gave me the opportunity to step back from therapies. Now I know where to start. Working with Concussion naturopathic guru. You're working with Dr. Harkle, aren't you?
I am. 6 weeks in.
Working with Concussion naturopathic guru now and noticing some significant changes. Yeah.
But it's baby steps. You can't put a whole bunch back together. I start with him. And then when I hit my plateau with him, then we can start looking at some of the other treatments that are in your program.
Exactly.
Yes. The problem is resources in this area are really far between.
Which boggles my brain because you guys are Waterloo, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The ridiculous thing is I'm Canadian, but my Ontario geography is absolutely horrible. But even people that message me from Toronto struggle to find resources. And so we do what we can to connect people, but there's not a lot of people, honestly. I think finding providers who are passionate about this area and continue to evolve and educate themselves in it that are accessible is hard. It's hard to find. It is hard to find. The naturopathic physician is Dr. Harkle, and he's fantastic in terms of that. So Lucy says, does palming help to calm the vagus nerve? Breathing and breath. Dr. Harkle's in Toronto. Breathing and breath is one of your direct when I say parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems, hands up if that makes, do you know what I'm talking about? Okay. So we have our autonomic nervous system, which is the nervous system you don't need to think about. It just does stuff for you. It's the one that controls your heart rate, your breath patterns, plays in sleep, all that sort of stuff. It constricts and dilates your blood vessels. Within that autonomic nervous system, we have what's called your parasympathetic nervous system and your sympathetic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight. It's where adrenaline kicks in. It's where you are like raring to go. Eyes are super big and dilated. You're ready to fight or run away. Your parasympathetic nervous system is your rest and digest. That's when you're calm. That's when you digest food. That's when you're that restful place. What happens most of the time, because everyone's a bit different, but very commonly after concussion, is we lose this imbalance between our nervous systems, and our sympathetic nervous system tends to become more dominant. Now, we need both nervous systems. We can't not have one of them, but there should be a more harmonious balance between them. And what happens when we have our sympathetic nervous system on overdrive, this is where if you randomly feel like you're more constipated, if you have that anxiety piece, if breath stuff, like all those things is your sympathetic nervous system. So when Lucy asked about the vagus nerve, your vagus nerve stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system. And so one of your direct links to what I call flipping that switch to help you calm down that sympathetic system and activate your parasympathetic system, which you want to do in most cases, is your breath. So yes, Lucy, palming would absolutely help you with activating that parasympathetic system because you're coupling it with breath work most of the time. Yeah. Do you have any modalities or treatments that help to tone down or eliminate tinnitus from TBI? Oh, tinnitus is a beast. Tinnitus comes from a multitude of different purposes as well. So tinnitus can come from a couple different reasons. So one, if you actually have damage to the structure of the inner ear, that can lead to tinnitus, but I would suspect you have ruled that out. Tinnitus can also come from overstimulation of the central nervous system. And it can also come from your neck. So there's cervical tinnitus, and then there's what we call like central nervous system, or related to that auditory processing, or actual damage to the structures within the ear themselves. So if you haven't yet, I mean, it's always worthwhile to visit an audiologist just to make sure that that your nerves are processing sound properly. And they can help give you some strategies as well. Some of them will give you, if your tinnitus is really bad, there's, oh my gosh, hearing aids, there we go, that then help you habituate to the sound. There's also an app called Tone Pacer that you can use to help habituate yourself to sound. But sometimes what that tinnitus comes is, it's a lot of people's warning sign for overstimulation. So for some people, it's one of the first indicators that they're starting to push that limit or that 2-point scale that we talked about, because tinnitus will start to ramp up. And it's a sign that they've done too much. And it's because of that overstimulation and that central nervous system processing that's happened. And then there are PD, and I've treated clients that the tinnitus was full on from their neck. So there's a really big interaction between your neck, your TMJ, kind of the inner ears, all that lovely stuff. I am currently nursing a bilateral ear infection. And when it hurt, it was my ear, but I had the most raging temporal headache, and it hurt to move my jaw. And it's because there's so much anatomically in this region. So the tinnitus can also be coming from your upper cervical spine. So if that's the reason, and the way you're going to know that it's more that, Lucy, is if you notice if your neck gets more painful, or you're doing a lot of neck work, or if you've done a lot, then you're going to notice that the tinnitus starts to get worse with things where your neck is involved. And the treatment for that is treating of the neck, for sure.
I just unmuted myself just to be able to ask instead of typing.
Perfect. Go for it.
I was just curious, because I can be laying on the ground, and if I tip my head forward a certain way, there's a certain angle where I can feel the tinnitus actually changes. It quiets down a lot. I just find it interesting. And there was it was a TED Talk, a professor who studies it and says that it's something to do within the brain. So I wonder how much it has to do with, how hard the hit is, or how much the brain gets rattled around for.
Not that I know. I don't know if I have never heard it related to that, but within the brain is when I'm talking about central processing, that's within the brain. It's how the brain is taking in all the information from the environment and kind of basically putting it together, that can be where tinnitus comes in. I've heard people say that it's more related to kind of the temporal lobe, because that's where auditory stuff is processed in that piece of things, but I haven't read anything specific to quote on that. But yeah, also in terms of it, particularly when you move your head a certain way, Lucy, it's there could be a cervical component too, but it could also be that when you turn your head that certain way, that process of turning your head provides another stimulus, which then helps as well.
Right. Thank you. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Margie says, my medical providers are hesitant to recommend specific vitamins, minerals for concussion treatment. What would your team recommend as your top 2? So this is where I'm not allowed. I will tell you what a lot of people take, Margie, and I hope I'm saying your name right. Because I'm a physical therapist, this is the frustrating part. It is outside of my scope of practice to give you direct recommendations. But here's what I would say. If you are looking at adding supplements or vitamins to your routine, which many people after concussion need to do, okay, I wouldn't do it until you've had blood work and connected with either a naturopathic physician or a functional medicine physician to truly understand what you need. Because what I don't want you to go do is spend a bunch of money on supplements and it not be the right thing for you. So there are definitely common ones, but I would do it with guidance. And Linda just put the lovely link for Dr. Herkel. So yeah.
I got one.
Who's speaking? Hello.
There.
What's your name? Brian?
No, it's Daryl. They just got
Daryl.
it on. You're talking about TBIs or ABIs, whatever you get to. I've been found out that I have thinning of the optic nerves of my eyes.
Okay.
Is that due to the cause of the accident, or is it my age?
I have not heard of that being related to because of an accident.
Okay.
So I mean, I'm never one to say it's not, but you would be the first person I have met that the thinning of the optic nerve was because of the accident.
Because 6 months to a year ago, they found the thinning of my right eye,
Okay.
the optic nerve.
Yeah.
Now they found that I'm thinning of my left eye. It's
Oh.
starting to take effect.
You're working
Yeah.
with an ophthalmologist, I'm guessing, yes.
Oh, yes,
And a neuro-ophthalmologist probably. And
in the future.
yeah. Yeah. I haven't heard of that being related to concussion. That would be a new one for me, but I do hope that there's something they can do to support you in that.
So do I.
I wish you all the best.
Well, they're just testing me now for peripheral vision,
Yeah.
and it's not going too good.
No. And that would be the tricky thing too for me as a practitioner. It's if the nerve is thinning, then it's you're losing the input from the nerve itself to the brain. You're probably losing axons. But if you were to do a little bit of therapy, like if someone were to guide you with therapy, would there be the potential to maintain what you have? I don't know.
Okay, well, you give me some questions to ask my optometrist when I go back. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely have that discussion. Be like, is there anything I can do to at least help maintain where I'm at today?
Yes.
And then what I would say is too, is in terms of, because what I'd be curious about is if there is an inflammatory component to that or not, I don't know. But then could there be things that you could be doing to help just overall systemic inflammation, et cetera, in your life as well, that may have a positive effect?
Thanks.
You're welcome. Does anyone else have any? We have 9 minutes, my friends. I could talk about this stuff all day. So does anyone have any other questions though, or topics that they're particularly interested in that they would like me to touch on? How many people are still doing active care for their rehab? Or sorry, active rehab for their TBIs and for their concussions? So there's 2, 3 of you. And everyone else has kind of paused at this point. Okay. How many of you still think you can improve?
Aye.
Well, those hands make me feel happy. I do want to say, you guys, there's this old, the myth, and it's 100% a myth that after a certain number of years, you can't change. That is not the case. We help people who it's been 9, 10 years since their concussions, and we see change in them in the clinic. So do I promise that your life will go back to how it was? No. But do I, with the dedication and the work that you do, can you improve from where you are in this moment? Yes, fully. As in, like, you can have forward progression. We never stop changing as human beings, right? Neuroplasticity is a beautiful thing. Neuroplasticity is the ability for your brain to learn. It is not fixed. It is not stuck in the way it is. Whether it's we're rehabbing or whether it's we're learning strategies to support where we're at or be better at where we're at, there's always things we can be doing to improve.
I have a question. Florence, you don't see me.
Okay. Hi, Florence.
Hi. My husband was concussed when he was 5, 6 years old. Okay. And could he be having problems now that he's 70?
There's probably a multitude of things that are playing into it, but it's a past medical history and it's a factor for sure. So you'll talk to, if you ever watch anything from the Amen clinic. So Dr. Daniel Amen is a psychiatrist who has significant interest in TBI and brain injury, and he uses what's called a SPECT scan to help him have an idea of people's brain health. He will ask someone in their history 10 different times if they've ever hit their head or ever had a brain injury. Because yes, it can absolutely affect you years later in life. And then the other thing we know too, and that research is starting to show, is that if you did have a series of brain injuries or concussions as a youth and you lost consciousness, it's never a guarantee, but it does put you at risk of developing dementia in your later years.
Yes.
Right? So yes, it could absolutely be a factor as to if he's struggling now in his 70s, that could have been an issue.
Well, he's been declared cognitively impaired
Yeah.
recently by geriatric, and his doctor doesn't want to label him as brain injured.
Right.
So I'm just beginning to investigate.
Yeah.
Signing on with you guys.
Yeah. There's it's possible for sure.
Mhm.
Life is a series of accumulation of events, right? So
Yeah.
when we look at why you could take two exact people, so the two people directly in front of me on the screen are Lucy and not Mark, but Mark. Those are the two people who are directly in front of me on my screen. These two ladies could have had the exact same concussion, the exact same force, the exact same trajectory. They could look completely different. Their symptoms could be completely different. Their recovery could be completely different, even though they did the exact same therapies. And it's because it's based not only on that incident itself, but who you are and what makes you up as a human being leading into that incident as well. So yes, life and accumulation, all those factors play a role. There was a question that came in about what do you do about doctors who blame everything on somatic symptom disorder? So that happens a lot. So somatic symptom disorder, basically what that means for a lot of people is that it's all in your head. But it's a very real thing and you can still do stuff about it. So a somatic symptom disorder, otherwise sometimes called functional neurological disorder, used to be called psychogenic as well. Remember how we talked about there's these different factors that make up concussion, right? So you actually have like your vestibular stuff, you have your ocular motor stuff, you have hormonal metabolic stuff, and then there's mental health, psychiatry, like all that. It's all a piece of it. And it's the psychological piece is as important as the rest of it. But I find sometimes what happens is when someone can't explain your symptoms or someone can't piece together why things are happening, that's when the diagnosis of functional neurological disorder comes into play or somatic symptom disorder. It's just, there's still things you can do. You just have to find a therapist who is open to doing an assessment and then potentially working with you. It's all based on, you guys, if someone calls me at my clinic and talks about the symptoms they're having, my response is, if there's symptoms that I'm familiar with and they describe a mechanism that I think I might be actually able to help with, my answer is always, this starts with an assessment. If I see things in my assessment that I feel like I can help you with that makes sense to the symptoms you're demonstrating, then I will treat you. If I do your assessment, so this has happened in the past. So I've done an assessment where someone has very real symptoms. When you're talking about somatic symptom disorder, your symptoms are still real, very real. But if I go through my assessment, so I'm assessing your ocular motor system, your vestibular system, your cognition, like your autonomic nervous system. That's me. That's my hub. I don't do metabolics, and I don't do like therapy or cognitive stuff, like mental health stuff. I have a team that takes that part. I do the neurology piece of the physiological piece of things. So if I put you through my assessment and I don't see anything that I can help you with, like your vestibular stuff is showing up normal, your visual stuff is showing up normal, you're passing my test with flying colors, but you're having these symptoms, that is when I will usually recommend we find you a really kick-ass counselor or psychologist. Because it's possible, like there's something happening that we need to address. It's real. But if I can't find anything that I can treat, and we talk about mental health in my assessment as well, so I wouldn't recommend a psychologist or a counselor without having some history too. But if I can't find anything in my assessment, and my assessment, you guys, is about 2 hours long. It's a very in-depth assessment. So if I can't find anything that I can help that can explain your symptoms, then I'm automatically going to, okay, are we looking at something that's more metabolic that I need to refer to a naturopath or functional medicine? Are we looking at something that could potentially be somatic symptom disorder or have that component of it that we need to bring on a really awesome psychologist or clinical counselor? Just for reference, I employ 2 clinical counselors in my clinic because that's how important I think it is in this path that you guys are on. Do we need to look at like what else is there that could be contributing to the symptoms you're experiencing that I need to help connect you with? But unfortunately with somatic symptom stuff, sometimes it's if the doctors don't have like a tick box able to explain, then that's the diagnosis that people get a lot. What do you do for the psychological aspect of TBI? I refer to my counselors. We talk about mindset a lot. So I'm really big on mindset and wins and finding those silver linings, acknowledging the crappy moments when they happen and letting you feel that, but then guiding you out of that so you don't live there every day. But then I have 2 clinical counselors on my team who are both trained in CBT, acceptance theory, art expression, EMDR, all the gambit. And then the other thing too is neurofeedback therapy. Can also, if you're dealing with a PTSD, anxiety, depression component from your TBI, neurofeedback therapy can be very helpful as well. So we don't have that at my clinic yet, but it will get there. It will. I just had a message about what about multiple concussions on top of brain injury, which from what I understand can alter your brain, having challenges relearning. So if I'm reading this right, multiple concussions, if you don't rehab them, so back up. Not every concussion needs rehab. If you ever have a concussion, I always recommend getting an assessment because our brain is very good at compensating. And the example I always use is balance because it's a goodie. So to balance, we use 3 systems. We use our visual system, we use our vestibular system, and we use what we call our somatosensory or proprioceptive system. That somatosensory proprioceptive is the one that processes sensory information like touch, pressure. It's the one that registers if your tendons or your muscles lengthen or contract, that one. So to balance, we use all 3 of those systems. Depending on the environment you have to balance in, you're going to weight 1 or 2 of those systems more than the other. The normal human uses your vision more than anything else. But when you close your eyes, all of a sudden you can't use vision, so you need to use your vestibular and your proprioceptive systems. So they're able to shift, to step up to the plate so that you can still function, right? So say you've had a series of concussions and you've never rehabbed it because you didn't feel the need because you could function just fine. It could have been because other systems were stepping up to the plate to compensate for one that wasn't working as well, which I tend to call dysfunctional. Okay. So when you have multiple brain injuries, and this is usually the case, you guys, when I find someone that's like, I literally just got bumped in my car and now I have this raging concussion, I call it the straw that broke the camel's back. Your brain can only compensate for so long before it loses its ability to support you. Right? So I had one client once who she got was it a concussion? Yes. So she had a concussion and not from a crazy accident in any way, shape, or form. She was one of those ones that got bumped and she was like, I don't understand. But then we dug into her history. She'd had concussions as a kid. She'd had a virus in her inner ear. She'd had these things in her system. Her brain had literally been compensating for her for years. And then she got the accident and it was the final straw. So now what happens is not only do you have the actual injury from the hit, you lose all your compensation strategies and it opens this can to all the things you've been struggling with over the years. That's why when I say when you're in this persistent stage, things can get multifactorial. because as you start to peel back the layers, more things can show up that have been being supported by your really kick-ass brain until this point. So that's kind of how that piece fits in.
Are there certain symptoms? Are there certain symptoms of concussion?
There's a, sorry, I cut
Like
you off.
well, my husband used to bang his head against the wall, take his hand and bang his head against the wall. Is that a symptom of concussion?
So concussion itself has a whole slew of symptoms. So there can be physical symptoms, there can be emotional symptoms, there can be cognitive symptoms. So if you're looking at emotional symptoms, or we call, or mood for your affect, however you talk about, that's things like impulsivity, short-temperedness, challenging regulating emotions, so you'll be fine and then you're crying, those sorts of things. Cognitively, that's where we look at things like memory, processing. So by processing, I mean someone being able to like tell you something and you work through what it means and then say something else. Being able to have multiple conversations at the same time. Then when you go into physical, you're going into dizziness, neck pain, headaches, feeling those zaps or tingles or just weird sensations that you have a hard time putting a name to, those things. And this is literally the tip of the iceberg. This is not all the symptoms. And then sleep is the other one. So is slamming his head against a wall a symptom of concussion? No, but is it the other factors that are leading him to doing that? Possibly. I think there's like 46 symptoms or like 42 symptoms that are currently written down of what could mean a concussion. But yeah. I have time for one more question. And then I will leave you for the evening. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to say or share? Andrea.
So I joined Concussion Compass last year. I have been following Molly on Instagram and probably Facebook for quite a while. I follow BIAWW. When I joined Concussion Compass, it became overwhelming, all the different groups. So I dropped your group, got everybody there. And then I've just brought you back in. That's why I found out about this Zoom meeting, because I have extra space now to be able to interact with more than one group. But the resources that are available to us and the support, I think, is the biggest plus for me. And I'm slow making my way through the program. I still haven't done very many of the modules. I'll pick and choose some days because it's a lot of information to process. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with everybody.
Compass was, and I love that you're there, and like Compass was designed to be self-paced for that exact reason. That exact reason. Everyone is at different stages and everyone works through it at their own pace. I just put so that's my direct email address, you guys. So if you have any questions, do feel free to reach out. That is the Concussion Compass website. And then the @Natasha.Wilch, if you are on social media, that is my Instagram handle. And so on Instagram, I post things about concussion all the time and tips and tricks and all that stuff. Concussion Compass is currently closed, but we are reopening at the end of this month. And so if you're interested, go visit the website and join the wait list. It doesn't commit you to anything, but our wait list will get, let's just say you want to be on the wait list if you're at all interested. But please don't hesitate to reach out. Honestly, if you have any questions, that is my personal email. I am the one who checks that email box and responds. So feel free to reach out and connect. Thank you for having me. P.S. by the way.